Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So the good news is we're going to have fun tonight. The bad news is I forgot my notes. You can't hear me? Well, what are you sitting over there for? You should be sitting right here. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You don't need a microphone. I have a loud enough voice. And here's the problem. The problem is that I'm not going to stand in one place. I'm going to move. So I will try to pay attention to you back here as much as I try to pay attention to you and all of you. Well, I can take it off. So take it off. Excuse me. Well, of course, you are talking about Real Housewives, so that would only be fair. Who have you studied so far this year? And were you here last year when they started? Was it the year before? Is this the third year or the second year? Okay, who's the most interesting character you've studied so far? All right, hopefully you have not studied Tamar. Otherwise, you're going to go home very early. There were two. Very good. There were two Tamars that I contemplated teaching, and I couldn't figure out which one because both stories belong on television. Both are soap operas. Both are filled with such R-rated information, but I decided to go easier, and I'm not doing the Tamar of the David story with Amnon and Avshalom because I might get embarrassed in front of you. And so instead, I'm going to do the Tamar story of Genesis because we're going to be reading it very soon. And so I figured, why not pick the Tamar that we're going to be introduced to and the one that you are probably familiar with. But the question is, who is this Tamar? What kind of person is she? Is she a victim like so many of the other women of the Bible? Or is she a heroine like some but not as many of the women of the Bible? That's the question that I want to pose to you. Is it okay if we begin with the bracha for studying Torah? Okay. All right. So the bracha is la'asok b'divrei Torah. That's the way it ends. So if you know it and you would like to join me, please do so. But there is no obligation. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, it's already warm in here, so if you don't mind, I'm going to take my jacket off. That's all, though, okay? That's it. Yes? Would you tell us before you start something about... I will be happy to tell you anything you want to know about me. I am Rabbi Richard Camras. Grew up here in Los Angeles, actually studied at this wonderful university. I went to rabbinical school here. For 2 years, I grew up at Sinai Temple. I was a product of Los Angeles Hebrew High, both at the old LA Hebrew High, and when this campus opened up, I was in the class that moved in here and studied here. I went to Camp Ramah, grew up in a conservative household, as I said, at Sinai Temple. Been the rabbi of Shomrei Torah Synagogue, which is out in the West Valley, in West Hills, this is my 14th year, and I served a rather large congregation in Baltimore, a place called Chizuk Emunah. Some of you may be familiar with it, for the first 7 years of my rabbinate. Married to also a Los Angelino, Carolyn Resnick, and we have two kids, 15 and 12. What else do you want to know? Okay, you want to know about Torah. That's why we're here, so let's jump into it. Because I forgot my notes on my computer, which is so typical of who I am, I want to read you something. And it comes from the wedding of Ruth and Boaz. Now, why do I want to talk about the wedding of Ruth and Boaz? Because in many ways, I believe that Tamar exhibits many of the qualities of Ruth. There is a great deal of unconventionality in her behavior, and it's reflective in the unconventionality of many of the women of the Torah, the women of the Bible. And so at the wedding of Ruth and Boaz, the wishes for them were, the woman who is coming into your house, this was referred to Boaz, should be like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And that your house be like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Judah, from the seed that God gives you from this girl. So let me repeat it one more time, because I want us to think as we go through this, what does Tamar have in common, or what does she not share with these women? Right? So Ruth, this is the passage, Ruth is a Moabite, that's right, that is given to Boaz before Ruth and Boaz get married. That the woman, right, Ruth, who is coming into your house, should be like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and that your house be like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Judah from the seed that God gives you from this girl. So if you don't know, Tamar eventually has two children. She has twins, and they are Peretz. Peretz is one of them, who's the one that's going to be born second, but we're going to get to that a little bit later. So I think we're going to do this. I think we're going to read the story through once, just so that we can get a feel for the story. Then I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts with regard to the characterization of Tamar? Then what we're going to do is going to go through the story in different sections. As you can see, I divided it up into different sections. And then we're going to open it up for discussion afterwards, and we should be out of here by about 11 or 11:30. Does that work? Yes. Okay. All right. So, do I have a volunteer who would like to read, or would you like me to read? How about if I read? Okay. Don't pay too much attention to the divisions at this point, because we're going to come back and look at them one by one. The translation, by the way, I tried to get the Everett Fox translation, but it was just too complicated when I Xeroxed it. It didn't come out very good, and I love the Everett Fox translation because it is as close to the Hebrew as there is a translation. So instead I got you the New Revised Version, a nice Christian version, which isn't so bad, with a change or two along the way. Now it was at that time Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He took her as his wife and came into her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son whose name was Er. She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Don't mess with God. That's not in there. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance Petach to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you, she asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it, she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. If it was so easy. After she left, unless you're 19 years old, after she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute, the Kadeshah, who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her." Beside, the men who lived there said, "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out." And he was named Peretz. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. Okay, well, this is why you don't read this story to 8-year-old boys or 13-year-old boys. You know, when children begin studying Torah in the yeshiva world, where do they begin studying? What book of the Torah do they begin with? No, definitely not Breshit. Why not Breshit? Yeah, because it's filled with these kinds of stories. Where do they start? Leviticus, about as dry and boring as you can get. Right? Sacrifices, you have no worries about that whatsoever. But can you imagine starting the Torah reading with something like this? All right. Yes, you would. Absolutely. So, what do you think about this story? How does it portray Tamar and Judah and any of the other characters, for instance? And then we're going to come back, as I said, and analyze each of the sections more in depth. But heroine or victim? Okay. I heard smart. What else do you have to say about Tamar? Clever. Prolific. Why do you say prolific?
We were mentioning that the other women we talked about, many of them had fertility issues. Many of them were women, the matriarchs, and that we had talked to. Does not fall into this category.
Who have you talked about? Just give me a sense of the women that you've studied this year. Hannah, yeah, fertility issues there. Lilith, Lilith we're not going to get into. Zipporah, Rachel, Dinah, poor Dinah, Leah. So what did you learn? What is the common feature of the women of the Bible vis-a-vis fertility? Okay, but the very fact that they have problems, what does that tell you about the whole notion of fertility? Where does it come from? Yes, who said that? Right? It comes from God. There is a very significant element of the divine, reward or punishment, potentially with regard to women and their ability to conceive or not conceive. Tamar, by the way, names are so important in the Torah. Right? Names have significant meaning. So with regard to Tamar, what does Tamar mean? It's a date palm. And what do we know about the date palm? Yes, they are luscious. They are, date palms provide enormous amounts of dates on one condition. they are pollinated by human beings, right? So it takes an outside hand to fertilize. I'm not a horticulturist, so I'm not an expert in date palms. But as far as I understand, for the date palm to be as successfully pollinated as possible, it needs to come from the outside. So with a name like Tamar, right, already the Bible is setting up a tension. And what is that tension that the Bible is setting up? It's the same tension that each of the, or many of the women that you already just described or talked about set up as well. Will they be fertile? Will they be prolific? Will they be the mothers of the generations to come afterwards? And why is that an essential question? Yes, because it relates to us. Will we be here? We can't be here if our foremothers are not fertile. And the question is, where does that fertility come from? So with Tamar, it's a question. Will she be able to produce? Will she be prolific? Will she be the mother, right, of the story? And the key male figure in this story is none other than Judah. And what do we know about Judah? I don't know if I can repeat that because I'm being filmed. He has his moments, we can say that, Judah. What's interesting about Judah, as we're going to see, is that we are given insight that Judah is not given. So it's a little bit unfair. Not a lot unfair, just a little bit unfair, right? Because Judah does not play the game fairly either. He is deceitful to Tamar. There's no doubt about it. We're going to look at that in a minute. But we know more information because of the narrators cluing us in than he knows. And so he suspects things. He believes things. He understands things. When in reality, we're going to see that that's not indeed the case. But Judah is the father of, right, the Judeans. There's a tension in the Bible between the family of Joseph, who is the son of which matriarch? Rachel. And Judah, or Reuven, or Shimon, or Levi, any four of them, but one at a time, they all get rejected, right? Reuven gets rejected because what does Reuven do?
Sleeps with his father's concubine.
Yes, sleeps with it. It's a no-no, right? Sleeps with his father's concubine, goes up to her bed. Although the Talmud is very careful in Shabbat to claim that Reuven did nothing wrong, that we misinterpret the Torah. But from the perspective of the Torah, Reuven is rejected because of that. Shimon and Levi, which should be the next ones in line to be able to inherit, right? They attack, exactly, they massacre Shechem and the entire town. So they are rejected, all right? And that leaves Judah. And so as much as this story is about Tamar, it is equally about Judah. And the question is, Judah fit for the job? Or will he be rejected outright like Reuven, Shimon, and Levi? And we see, of course, as we read the whole of the story, right, that Judah indeed does get chosen for the mantle. Because for those of you in the room who happen to be Jewish, where do you think that name Jewish comes from? It comes from Judah, from Judean, right, which was the major tribal area where the Israelites lived after the destruction of the north and the Assyrians, and after the exile and whatever else. It was Judeans, which is why we became Jews. So for the biblical authors, for those Judeans who are thinking back to their sacred history, Judah is going to play a very important role, obviously, because he's the father who survives. And that tension between Joseph and Judah never gets resolved completely in the Bible, which is why we have Ephraim and Manasseh and the role that those two tribes play versus the tribe of Judah. But for the sake of this story, we're going to ask ourselves the question, does Judah redeem himself from being the schmuck that it looks like he is? Not my language, your language. I don't want to be credited with that. In the beginning of the story, does he redeem himself? And how does he redeem himself? And of course, we know he redeems himself on his own, but it's really through the actions of Tamar that allows the line of Judah to continue. Okay, so shall we go into the story in depth? Yes, please. By the way, ask any questions anytime. 1, 2, and then 3. Go ahead.
You mentioned, or the story mentions shrine prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yes.
like temple prostitution?
Not exactly. There were prostitutes, and then there were kadeshot, which were women that were, most biblical scholarship, modern biblical scholarship, claims that they were not prostitutes of the temple. We're talking about in Canaan and in the ancient Near East. They were called kadesha. And kadesha had many roles. One of them may have been some form of freedom to sexuality, which a widow, a woman still attached to an unmarried maiden, still attached to her father, doesn't have freedom of her body. A woman who's married doesn't have freedom of her body. In other words, to choose who she can marry, who she can be with. But a kadesha and a prostitute are free from the family dynamics and therefore free to sleep with whomever it is they want to sleep with. And because the kadesha will earn money from her work in the temple, right, she could choose to or not to sleep with somebody, whereas a prostitute usually slept with somebody in order to be able to earn economic living because they had no other means to find money.
So Kadesha need not be a prostitute.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a prostitute. Exactly. Yes?
Didn't David do the same thing?
Take a woman?
Just one.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Didn't David also take a woman, Bathsheba, who wasn't his, right? She was married to Uriah. Yeah. There was a hand in the back.
I have a kind of similar question about shrine prostitute. I mean, was that okay? 'Cause
It was okay. It was part of the... Yes, so as was prostitution. I mean, it was part of the culture of the ancient Near East, as prostitution is part of the culture of the modern world as well. There are no cult prostitutes anymore, or kadeshot, women who work in the temple grounds in a variety of different capacities, but it certainly existed in ancient times.
There was a profession.
question was, I didn't understand like why when Judah thought she was pregnant from someone else, he wanted her burned. But when
Good. Hold that question. We're going to get to it. Will you hold on to it?
That's what I wanted.
Okay, we're going to get to it as we go through the text. Yes?
As we go through the text, will you point out what is different in this translation from what is in the Jewish translation, please?
Very little. I mean, this translation it's close to the JPS. The JPS is less of a word-for-word literal translation. The JPS is the one that I would imagine for those of you that are connected to synagogues and go to synagogue and open up the Eitz Chaim, it's a conservative synagogue, or the Plout at a Reform synagogue. That translation is the JPS translation. It's a wonderful translation, but it's not an exact translation from the Hebrew into English. As you know, any translation is, of course, an interpretation. So this is as close as the Everett Fox one, which was Buber's translation, as I can get. That, and I didn't want to bring it in the Hebrew because then I thought we would just get lost if we went back and forth in the Hebrew. It would take too much time and we didn't have enough time to do that. Yes?
So were they in the pagan temples?
Yes.
In the pagan.
In the pagan temples. Yes. All right, last question. Go ahead.
Since they're on the name, is there a significance to the twins' names? Because
Yes, parrots means a breach, to like burst forth. And that's exactly what, whereas Jacob, right, waited for Esau to come out of the womb and then tried for the rest of his life to take the birthright from Esau successfully. Parrots doesn't even wait to get out of the womb. He is so anxious to take the birthright that he bursts forth, which is the intentionality of his name. And what do we know about parrots? Right? The importance of parrots is that if you go to the story of Ruth and you look at the lineage from the story of Ruth, who is a Moabite, which I'll talk about in 1 second, her lineage, parrots becomes the father that eventually of Boaz, and Obed, which eventually, of course, brings us to none other than who? Exactly, King David. So what the story is telling, what all these stories are telling, is David's lineage, King David's lineage. And it's interesting how on both sides of King David's lineage, you have women who act in very, I'm going to get to the end of the story now, who act in very unconventional ways to assure their fertility, to assure the line of their husband, or in the case of Ruth's lineage, Ruth is a Moabite. What do we know about the Moabite lineage? Where does it come from? Yeah, it comes from Lot's daughters. And what do we know about that story of Lot's daughters? They slept with their father. Why did they sleep with their father? Exactly, to propagate the human race because they thought it was the end of the world. Were they wrong in what it was that they were doing? No. I mean, we can look at it from modern sensibilities and say, oh my God, a daughter who will, get her father drunk to sleep with him. But from their perspective, humanity was destroyed. They were the only ones left. And therefore, in order to honor the lineage, and they had just lost their own husbands. Remember, they were widows themselves, which plays an important role. Think about it. They were widows just as Tamar is a widow, right? They got their father pregnant. He was not aware of the act. It wasn't that he was committing a crime with his daughters. He was completely unaware of it. They were doing it because they thought the world had come to an end. Humanity had come to an end. And this is the line of Ruth. This is the line of Ruth, which is the line of King David. We also know from, it's be like Rachel and Leah. What do we know about Rachel and Leah? Were they above board in all of their dealings? No, right? There's all sorts of subterfuge going on in that relationship that Rachel allows, or Leah allows for Rachel. Rachel allows for Leah to step in on the night of the marriage, right? That's not very kosher. And then Leah buys off Rachel in order to be able to sleep with her husband because he doesn't love her as much as he loves Rachel. So it's very interesting that these are our origins. These are our ancestors. And so I want to ask you, we'll answer the question at the end, but what I want to ask you is, what is the Bible trying to tell us? Right? What is at stake here? What is with people like this, Tamar and the other women, what is the Bible asking of us? What is it saying of the story of the people of Judah? How do we survive in this world? Right now, don't answer that question yet. We'll get there. First, let's go through the story, and then we'll come back to that question. Fair? Okay, so let's take a look. Beginnings, Act 1. Now it was at that time. At what time? Interesting way to begin a story, right? Now it was at that time Judah left his brother. So what happens right before this moment? Right before that, right? Joseph is being sold into slavery. And how does Joseph get sold into slavery? Who doesn't step forward and stop it? The brothers, particularly Judah. Judah doesn't step forward. Reuben tries, right? Reuben tries to step forward and do something, but Judah does nothing at all. So I think an underlying message here is Judah going to redeem himself in order to be the progenitor of the Jewish people. And in a couple weeks, we're going to be reading a story about Judah when he's faced with an opportunity to save Benjamin or not save Benjamin. Remember, right before Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, first Joseph says, because they find the cup with Benjamin, and Joseph says, whichever brother has the cup, he's the one who has to stay with me. And yet, if you remember, already Judah had promised his father before they went back down into Egypt with Benjamin that he would protect Benjamin at all costs, that his father wouldn't lose Benjamin. Why was it so important for Jacob not to lose Benjamin? Exactly, because he was also the child of Rachel, and Joseph was already gone. So Judah steps forward in that point and promises his father that he will indeed watch out for Benjamin. And then, in that moment, right, in the Parshat Vayigash, Judah, literally Vayigash, he steps forward. And he says to Joseph, take me. Just don't take Benjamin. So we do see a evolution, a redemption in Judah. And the question is, where does that come from? It comes from this story, and it comes from Tamar. She is the impetus for Judah to be able to rectify his past mistake where he lets Joseph be sold into slavery and then redeems himself by saving Benjamin, which shows that he is indeed a capable, qualified individual to lead the Jewish people, to be that line. Okay, so that's why it says now it was at this time. Judah left his brothers, went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. Okay, we later on determined that this is a friend of Judah's. There Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. What is this familiar with? Did you study? You studied Dinah, right? Doesn't it sound familiar with the story of Dinah, Shechem going out and seeing a woman and taking her, that woman being Dinah? Right, so Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. Is that troubling at all? Who has he seen? He's seen a Canaanite. What do we know about the Canaanites? We don't like Canaanites, right? Isn't that what Rebekah said to Isaac, which is why she sent Jacob away to her family in the first place? I don't want him to be like Esau and marry these foreign women. And so here you have Judah seeing a foreign woman, and the Bible makes no judgment over that. Takes this woman, he took her, which is the biblical way of saying, me man, you woman, I want you, right? Throw her over his shoulder, take her into the tent, and then it's very explicit, the text. It's not mincing words, and came into her, right? And she became pregnant. Simple as that. Now, the question is that we have to ask ourselves, what does the Bible think about that? How might God judge that act? And we already know, because how does God judge acts that are displeasing to God? We certainly know in this story. What does God do? He kills them. Okay, does God kill Judah in this story? No. What else do we know about how God views this? Issues of, exactly, fertility. How many children does Judah have? 3. Clearly not displeasing to God, this act of marrying this Canaanite woman. And in the Bible, remember, there's no issues of conversion as there is today. Conversion doesn't take place as we know it, right, until much, much later. And the earliest vestiges of the notion of conversion really happens as a response during the period of time of the Maccabees, which they borrow the concept from the Hellenists. That's where, they go, Alexander Yanai, when he goes and conquers the lands, he conquers the Edomites, right, the tribe that Herod comes from, and he forces them to either convert to Judaism or to be exiled from their land. But before that, in the biblical period, in the early biblical period, this doesn't exist. Many times our forefathers take a woman like Moses, who took Zipporah, a Midianite, right, marries her, and she just becomes part of the tribe. So this woman that Judah takes, who isn't important in the story other than giving birth to these 3 sons, who are also not so important in the stories we're going to see, right? It doesn't seem to be displeasing before God.
Doesn't the Lord punish Moses when he wants to go into the land of Canaan at the end?
Into the land of, yes, but that has nothing to do with the fact that he married Zipporah. That had to do with, we don't know.
The rabbi said it was because he never admitted that he was a Hebrew when he asked for her hand, and that's why he was punished. Have you heard that story?
There are, because the Torah isn't explicit in terms of saying, this is the punishment, Moses, right? Or this is the crime that you committed, which is why I'm not going to allow you into the land of Israel. The Midrash presents a multiplicity of ways in which one can imagine Moses' crime. Perhaps the real crime wasn't a crime at all. Perhaps it was the recognition that Moses isn't God and all great leaders must die. And Israel and the Israelites needed a new type of leadership in the land of Canaan, a very different style of leadership, the leadership of Joshua, which is not the leadership of Moses. And Moses played a significant role. There was none other like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moses played a most important role, but at some point his role was no longer needed, and it was time to move on and change leadership. Why he wasn't allowed to enter the land of Israel and all that, okay, it's a different conversation. We'll have to come back next year for that one. Okay, she becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son whose name is Er. What does Er mean?
How's it spelled?
Ayin, right? Resh.
Thank you.
So it could be like Lahit Orer, which is to wake up, exactly. Could be wake up, to be energetic. Or if you flip the letters, what does Resh Ayin spell? And what is Ra? Bad or evil. Okay, so it all depends upon how he's going to play out his life. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. His name was Er. She conceived again and gave birth to a son whose name was named Onan. What does Onan mean? It could mean vigor, manliness, or it could mean nothing. No, that's going to be later. I know where you're going. And it's okay because we have an older crowd, so we can speak about that. And we will speak about that a little bit later. And I promise not to get embarrassed. And then she gave birth to another, and his name was Shelah, which means Shelah. Is it going to be hers, or is he not going to be hers? Who's hers? Tamar's, which we know about, right? The potential. So within each of these three sons is the opportunity for Judah's line to continue. Is it going to be Er, who is the eldest, the firstborn? Is it going to be Onan? Is it going to be Shelah? Is it going to be all three of them? Will they, La Briud, be the progenitors of the Jewish people? It was at Kazib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for Er, his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. What do we know about Tamar's background? Nothing at all. Exactly, nothing at all. Why? Because she's a woman. Okay, but let's be fair. Let's be honest. She's not just a woman, right? She plays a significant role. And we have to remember, we can't look at the Bible and judge and evaluate the characterization through our modern eyes. It's a patriarchal society that we're dealing with. And yet, as much as it's a patriarchal society, it is a radical achievement that the women of the Torah play such a significant role in shaping the destiny of the Jewish people. Much more so than any other literature of the ancient Near East. And so while we don't know Tamar's origin, and that leaves it up for us to figure out where does she come from, what matters is not where she comes from. What matters is what she does. Exactly. Yeah. You can disagree with anything that I say.
I don't know, not to disagree, but it says it was at Kazib that she gave birth to him. Why is that mentioned and it's not mentioned about the other two sons where they were born?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Probably, I believe Kazib means false. So that the potentiality of him being that one who's going to be the progeny and take the line is false. It doesn't work. And we see that later on in the story. So perhaps it's a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. Right? The possibility exists with him, as we're going to see with the first two sons dying, but Judah doesn't do what it is that he promises he's going to do. So he makes almost like a false promise to his daughter-in-law Tamar because he doesn't fulfill that promise.
Where geographically is Adullam?
I don't know. I'm guessing somewhere close by, somewhere in the area of, it's a part of the land of Canaan. It's not too far away from where it is that he is living in the land of Canaan, because he doesn't go too far away, but I don't know exactly where. All right. End of the first act. Any other questions to this first act? It's set up very clear, right? We know the players, and now comes disaster.
I have a question.
Yes?
When it says he took her and came into her, did she have anything at all to say about this? Not a thing.
Do the women of the Bible typically have anything to say? Did Dinah have anything to say? Does the Tamar who's raped by her half-brother Amnon have anything to say? I mean, yes, she argues, please don't do this to me. Don't do this to you. You're going to destroy our house. You're going to shame me. You can't do this. But, and, right, we know that. It's the fall of the house of David. No. No, but we're also not assuming that she is against it. There's no reason to believe this is rape. Right? There's nothing here to say this is rape. This is some negotiations with Judah and Shua over this woman. And a woman didn't have a lot to say. A woman, went from her father's home to her husband's home. I don't want to use the word property. But she certainly didn't have the rights that women have today. By the way, when did women have the right to vote in America? Okay, so let's, we have to remember that women's equality is still something that we have not yet fully achieved in this country with all of our modern sensibilities, let alone in the rest of the world. So we can't be too harsh on the Bible. Yeah.
Now, did what Judah do to this woman, was it the same thing that Shechem did to Dinah?
I would imagine no, because he marries her, right?
Shechem tried to do that.
No. First he rapes her, then he goes to the father and says, but he goes to the Canaanite man named Shua, right? There is that relationship that's first established, not the sexual encounter that's established first in the case of Shechem. Yeah. He took her as a wife, exactly.
Is the as a wife actually written in the Torah?
Yeah, he took her as a wife. Well, no, it's not as a wife. That's why I put it in parentheses, but it's assumed in the language.
Why?
Why? Because if you know biblical Hebrew, the way in which it's conceived is that it's assumed that with the transaction and the mention of the Canaanite man named Shua, that it was his wife.
But you don't know her name.
We don't know her name because she's not important, because she doesn't play the role. It's not her sons that are going to carry on the line. It is the daughter-in-law who's going to carry on the line, so she's not important. Okay, but Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked, Ra, in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. We know that. We understand that because the Bible tells us that. The Bible does not have to give us that information, but the Bible gives us that information. Why does it give us that information?
Because it's setting it up so that the father-in-law is going to be scared to let Tamar have the third son.
Exactly, right? Because he believes that she is a husband killer. Not physically like a black widow, but she's cursed. So it's important for us to know what Judah doesn't know, because it puts Judah in a place of foolishness from our perspective, innocence from his perspective, but it also lets us see his deceit, because we know really what is going on. Okay, now, then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. What does this mean? What's going on here? Yes, thank you, a Levirate marriage. Normally it would be incest. But in the case where the brother doesn't have children of his own, the second brother, or even potentially the third brother, marries her so that those children that she has, that first child that she has, whose child is it? It's the first brother's child. So now let's think about this from an economics perspective from Onan. If he does the Levirate thing, right, sleeps with his brother's wife, impregnates her, a child is born, that child inherits as the firstborn. And what do we know the firstborn inherits over the other brothers? Not everything. A double portion, and then the rest of it is divided up, or 50%, right? And then it's subdivided. So if Onan doesn't do this, Onan is set to be the one who's going to inherit that double portion. So he's no dummy, right? Why should he sacrifice and only get a quarter? Because if he has a child through her, that child's going to get the 50%, then he's only going to get half of the remaining half, because he has to share the other half with his other brother, his younger brother. So what does he do? Coitus interruptus. Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Now, you had raised something, right? You had understood the modern Hebrew of his name, Onan. Onan means, in modern Hebrew, to masturbate. And for the rabbis, they read this story as saying because he masturbates on the ground in order not to impregnate his wife, it's the act of masturbation that is displeasing before the Lord. But we see from the story that's not what's displeasing before the Lord. And I'm not disagreeing with the rabbinic interpretation. They just added a layer of reading the story. What is displeasing to the Lord is that he doesn't fulfill his Levirate duties. Right? That's what's displeasing to the Lord. And so, off with his head. God is very clear in this story. You mess with God, off with the head. Now, and this goes back to what you had said earlier, right? Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house. Unfair position, right? Because a widow in ancient Near Eastern law means that she's free to marry again. She may not be able to get the creme de la creme because she's a widow, used, so to speak, but she still has freedom. But what does Judah say to her here? He says, live as a widow, but don't live as a widow, because you have to go to your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. Implying what? That he's not old enough yet to impregnate you, but when he's old enough, the age of 10 and above, then I owe you him because of the laws of Levirate. Or if Judah doesn't give Shelah, then he has one other option if he's going to hold her to the family. What's that one other option? He could impregnate her, exactly. That's the other option. I know. But again, remember, later on it becomes incest. It's only not incest in the case of fulfilling the duty of the Levirate. But he chooses not to do. Does Judah have any intention of sleeping with his own daughter-in-law? No, daughter-in-law, thank you. Does he have any intention of giving Shelah to his daughter-in-law? So what is he doing to her? He's lying, and he is binding her for life. She is obligated to Judah in order for Judah to have grandchildren, but Judah is not going to ever provide her the means to have grandchildren. But Judah doesn't tell her, and Judah doesn't let her go. It's a great question, and the Torah doesn't tell us. Why? Why? I mean, well, the Midrash says lots of things, but I don't care about the Midrash. I care about you. What do you say?
They want to keep the line open.
Okay, so maybe, he feels, right, while he says one thing, and maybe he doesn't mean what he says, maybe he's afraid, and maybe he will change his mind at some point. Maybe he wants to, play the cards, bet on the fact that, the future, who knows what it will be, and maybe he will. We don't know. Yeah. You would think so. Look, what does Naomi do in the story of Ruth? Right? She has her sons, and what does she say to her daughters-in-law? She says, there's nothing else I can give you. Everybody's dead. I can't give you another child. So therefore, I am releasing you of your familial obligation. Judah doesn't do that, but Naomi does do that. And then, so we know the story of Ruth. Ruth chooses not to be released, and she says, no, I am going to still continue to be with you. And then she sacrifices her own life in order to go out and be with Boaz, who is a man much older than her, and impregnate him for the sake of Naomi, because we read in that story very carefully that the child who's born to Ruth and Boaz isn't Ruth's child. Whose is it? It's Naomi's child. Right? So there's that familial loyalty and that familial obligation that exists there. And Judah has the same thing, but he doesn't play by the rules. He doesn't play by the rules. And so Tamar is trapped. Yeah.
I have a question. In those times, were women, like, did they have dowries, or did they have to pay?
Yeah, if he made her into the true widow, then she could have gone back to her father's house and been free to start over again, take her dowry, marry another man.
So Judah would have had to repay her dowry.
Yeah, correct. So good. So that may be one of the reasons why Judah's not so willing to give. What did he get from her? Right? He has no grandchildren. He has nothing. He's got 2 dead sons. Right? It's not very good. And Judah doesn't know what we know, which is that they were displeasing to God. Judah doesn't know that. So he thinks that Tamar is the evil one. So maybe he wants to punish Tamar.
Don't they worry about how old the female is? Can she still birth a child? Well, Sarah.
They're young. You have nothing to worry about.
Thank you, I was concerned.
Okay, so, right, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Now, Tamar at this point doesn't know. Tamar assumes that, she doesn't know the rest of the story. We know the rest of the story. Tamar assumes that Judah is going to give Shelah, when he grows up, to her so that she could bring forth fruit for Judah's family. Right? So she puts on her widow's clothes and waits and waits and waits. And the text tells us how long she waits. Right? Tamar's trick. 3. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. Okay, well, good. So now Judah's free, right? When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went to Timnah, which is interesting because this is where one of Esau's wives is from, to the men who were sharing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to share his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim. I love that word. Petach Enaim. For those of you who speak Hebrew, what does Petach Enaim mean? Yes, the opening of the eyes. And this whole scene is about subterfuge. It's about deceit. It's about one's eyes being closed and one's eyes being opened eventually. So, and by the way, it was not usual for a zonah, a prostitute, to wear the veil. We know which of the matriarchs puts on a veil before she gets married? Well, okay, good, that's true. That is, she does put on the veil of deceit, but who puts on the veil, the first instance of veiling? Rebecca. Rebecca, as soon as she sees Isaac coming from the field, she gets down from her camel and she puts a veil over her face. So again, all of these mothers are wrapped into the story of Tamar. There's hints of all of these other stories. So she sits right on the road to Timnah. And of course, Judah can't miss her. And Judah is finished his grief, and he is, as men are, ready to go. And because it's a prostitute or a Kadesha, he feels that there's no issues there. He's free to do whatever he wants. She's free in this position to do whatever she wants. Right? For I skipped it. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. So she has to take matters into her own hands. She has to act. I've yet said this word before. She has to act in an unconventional way in order to achieve what she knows is necessary. In the same way that Lot's daughters had to act in an unconventional way, in the same way that Leah acts in an unconventional way, in the same way that Ruth acts in an unconventional way in order to perpetuate and assure and secure the line. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." Why is it important for the Torah to say, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law? Exactly. We want to absolve Judah of anything that he's committing that would seem to be unchaste, seem to be inappropriate. And he doesn't know, because his eyes are covered. Petach einayim. He's in the place of the opening of his eyes, but he is the most blind person in this story. Our eyes are more open than his eyes. He knows nothing. But she's a very, very smart, one of you said this in the very beginning, right? A very smart individual. Because she knows it's not enough just to become impregnated from him. She knows, she reads the future. She's aware of what will happen. So she says, "Well, will you give me to sleep with you?" First of all, what does that mean? Yeah, she wants payment. I'm a zona, I'm a prostitute. It's going to cost you, right? And it's a fairly high price, a goat. So he says, "I'll send you a young goat from my flock. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" She asked. He said, "What pledge?" Of course, she is very sophisticated young lady. "What pledge should I give you?" And it's remarkable what he gives, right? He gives everything that he could possibly give. He gives her his driver's license and his credit card. That's what he's basically giving her, right? Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. She wants to make sure that there are going to be no questions afterwards, that it is clear as day, that the eyes will be open, his eyes will be open to knowing that he is responsible for this child. So, foolish Judah gives them to her and slept with her, and of course, just like that, as simple as anything, she became pregnant. After she left, she took off her veil, put on her widow's clothes again, right? And the assumption is she went back to daddy's house, where she belongs in this story. Now, debt of honor. Now, this is key, right? Because this is as much a story about Judah as it is about Tamar. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. Why does Judah send his friend to get the pledge? Doesn't tell us, but any thoughts? He's a man of the town, and the last thing that he wants people to know is that he had his male urges and needed to go to a prostitute. So he sends his friend. And not only does he send his friend, but look at how his friend describes it to him, which tells you about what it was that Judah said to his friend, which perhaps leads to who Judah thought he was sleeping with. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the Kadeshah, the shrine prostitute?" Not just the everyday, ordinary street walker, but a different level of character, who was beside the road at Enaim. There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her." Besides the men who live there, right, to confirm his story, said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. So, and again, this is a positive character trait, I think, of Judah. Then Judah says, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock." He wants to repay his debt. He wants to be true to his word. But he sends it in the first place. Remember, meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend. He definitely wants to fulfill his promise to her. He wants his back. Of course he wants it back, but he made a fair transactional, transaction in the moment. He's paying his debt. He wants back his rightful stuff.
Yeah, but get it back, it doesn't matter to him, because this way, again, no one will know what he's done.
Well, exactly. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. I did what I needed to do in order to pay off my debt. All right, disgrace and conclusion. Whose disgrace? Although it seems as if it's Tamar's disgrace, but again, the Torah, right, pulls the wool out from under Judah's eyes. We know this because we know the story, but it appears that it's going to be Tamar's disgrace. About 3 months later, Judah was told. I wonder if that is where we get the idea of that we wait for 3 months to tell. You know what? I have to go back and look that up and see. About 3 months later, when Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Now, what doesn't Judah say? What do we want from Judah at this point? Forget what the Bible is about to tell us Judah says, but what do we want from Judah?
Restitution.
Yes, we want Judah to realize, oh my God, my poor daughter-in-law. Look what I did to her. It begins with Genesis because the Bible is a story about us, about human beings struggling in all of our petty jealousies and our envies and our lying and deceit. But these are our ancestors. These are the characters that we uphold. These are the people who are not perfect because we're not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. We're meant to struggle in our relationships with one another, but hopefully learn from our mistakes. And when it's clear that we've done something wrong that's been pointed out to us, we don't respond as Adam responded when God said, did you eat from the fruit of the tree? And what does Adam do? She made me, you know. It's actually even worse than that. What's the first thing he says? Adam, he says, you know, this woman, Eve, that you gave me, I didn't ask for her, right? I went to sleep one night and woke up the next morning and there she was it's your fault, God. You shouldn't have given her to me. Talk about, that's the definition of chutzpah. Right? Talk about looking a gift horse in the mouth. You know, there's Eve and he says to God, I didn't ask for her. What do you want from my life? Right? That's the sin. The sin isn't, I think, the eating of the fruit. The sin is the inability to say, Hineni, here I am. Yes, I ate from the fruit of the tree. It was tempting. Because you know what? In life, there's going to be temptations. The harlot is sitting by the side of the road. He's going to be tempted. That's the nature of what it means to be human. We have desires. The question is, do our desires, right, rule us? Or does our responsibility and obligation to serving the other rule us? In this case, so it seems that Judah is served by his own desires and not by his obligation to the other. And the immediate other in his life is none other than Tamar. And he refuses to accept that responsibility and obligation. Yeah.
Because to Judah, Tamar is just chattel. Just like the slaves were to the plantation owners, and they could do what they wanted. And that is what the men could do.
I don't know. I'm not so sure because I don't know. I don't know how much of your worldview you're placing on the Bible and if that's fair to say. I do believe, there's no doubt about it that women don't have the same freedom as men do. But look at Tamar. Look at how the Bible rewards Tamar in this story.
Amazing.
Rewards her because we already said, I said this in the beginning. Does Tamar become pregnant from Judah? Twins. What do we know about twins? Who else had twins? Rebecca. Cain and Abel, perhaps according to the Midrash. All right, so God is very pleased with the acts of Tamar. No problem. And the Torah itself is pleased with the acts of Tamar. Otherwise, she would not be the mother of, all the way back, of none other than King David. So, while I understand where you're coming from, we have to be careful. We have to be careful. And Judah's going to redeem himself in a minute. Right? Just takes a while. Because he's impetuous, as we often are impetuous. And we react in ill-advised ways because that is the nature of what it means to be human. So, Judah says, bring her out and have her burned to death. Simple as that. An imperative, very clear. Bring her out and have her be burned to death. Now, what you miss in the Hebrew, hold on one second, is that this next passive particle is a very unusual form of the Hebrew, as she was being brought out, right? It's a passive tense that's not often used in the Hebrew to distinguish the response of Judah, who has all the power in this moment. So he could proclaim, he could dictate, he could offer the imperative, whereas she seemingly is helpless, right? She is brought out. Okay, yes?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it doesn't say anywhere, and I guess we are led to wonder, why doesn't he think to find out how she got pregnant?
It's a very good question. It's an excellent question.
I mean, he doesn't ask, he just right away says,
Yes, because in his...
no questions at all are asked.
Again, why
Yes,
doesn't he assume it's his?
Why would he ever assume it's his? No, he can't assume it's his at this point. I mean, he meets a random prostitute on the side of the road.
When she comes out, he finds out that she's pregnant and so on and so forth. Why is it assumed that it's his?
It's not assumed. No, it's not assumed. She hasn't shared with him yet that it's his. She has to first bring forth right now all he knows is that she disobeyed. And he doesn't, as we said, doesn't stop and say, oh my, the injustice that I have done on her behalf. He doesn't say that yet. He doesn't, yeah. That's the ancient Near East. A woman is either, right, free or she's not. And a woman is not, in this context, she's not free. She lives at her father's house as a widow, which she should be free, but Judah is still attached to her because he's promised her Shelah. He's promised that there will be the Levirate marriage, so she does not have the freedom. A man in the Bible can have more than one wife. He can have it. Look at what Sarah's another, by the way, example of a woman who does what's necessary to carry on the line. She gives Abraham her concubine Hagar. Right? So you have ample examples. Jacob marries Rachel and Leah, but that's not enough. Right? Each one of them give their concubines over to Jacob, and they have more children through those concubines. The concubine children are just as much Jacob's children, or they are Jacob's children. She would have been, once she goes back to her father's house, if she wasn't attached still to Judah and was not given made that promise by Judah, she would have been free to either remarry, or, her father could have said, you're trouble, get out of my house. And then she would have been stuck. She either could have gotten a job in the temple, or she would have had no other choice if she didn't have a dowry, if she didn't have anything to support herself. But hopefully she would have been remarried. But she was in limbo. She couldn't do anything. And Judah wasn't doing anything to help matters. So she takes matters into her own hand. Mm-hmm.
Was there precedent for his decree of...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No question about it.
You just, as an individual, you have the right to say...
Burn, stone her. He didn't need a court of law.
Nothing, he could just say...
No, she's his property. And again, I don't mean it by the property, but he has full and total control over her destiny at this point. But the fact is that he really doesn't. That's the beauty of the story, right? The beauty of the story is he thinks he has control over her destiny. She's too smart for him, right? He doesn't have that kind of control.
Yeah, but when we said about Vern's death, he says, well, here's the pledge. Who does it belong to? Judah knows it's him.
That's right. Well, so here it comes, right? This is the beautiful moment of the story. As she was being brought out passively, she sent a message to her father. It is, I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she said, and here's her imperative, the Hebrew word please. It's softened a little bit from Judah's bring her out and burn her to death, but see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. So beautifully played, isn't it? Right, like a violin, so beautifully played from start to finish. Judah recognized them and said, without a moment's hesitation, she is more righteous than I. since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. It's not exactly the way the Hebrew is. He says, she is more righteous than I, since this I didn't give to her. What's the this? The baby, the pregnancy, right? I promised her and I didn't. She is more righteous, meaning, what is the implication of she is more righteous?
She figured out how to have a son.
I promised her something. I did not fulfill my promise. She deserved it. Right? It was hers. I promised it to her, and because I didn't do it, she took care of it. And she didn't do it in the wrong way. She had two choices, Shelah or me. Shelah wasn't available because I wasn't going to give it to her, so she had no other choice but to go to Dad. Right? That was her only other option. She was not going outside of the family. She was not interested in starting a whole new life. She was interested in making sure that Judah got what Judah wanted all along, but that Judah wouldn't do it on his own for whatever reason. Huh?
Look how she figured it out.
Yeah, as I say, she's brilliant.
But didn't Tamar, almost like a sidebar, actually make Judah comply with the duty as a...
Exactly. She made him fill the Levirate responsibilities that were always
So she
his.
made him righteous.
That's right. She made him fulfill. The Torah doesn't exist at this point, but if you want to argue God's law, she's the one who makes Judah fulfill God's law.
What I don't understand is that he doesn't sleep with her again.
Why?
But does he give her, does Shelah end up?
It doesn't matter because she already got what she got what she wanted. He got what he wanted, so he doesn't need to give her Shelah. Why does it say? I'm so glad you mentioned that. Why does it say he did not sleep with her again?
Because now would be unrighteous.
Exactly. If he sleeps with her again, it becomes an unrighteous act of incest. He's sleeping with his daughter-in-law. That's a no-no. The point is not that he should be sleeping with his daughter-in-law. The point is that he had an obligation to her. He's fulfilled the obligation unknowingly, unwittingly, and God forbid he should do it again. That's not his intention at all. He is a good person, a misaligned person. He didn't behave the way he should have behaved, but he's not cruel. He's not any of those things. And so this makes it very clear. He doesn't sleep with her again. That's not there's no relationship here. This is a relationship of economics, a familial obligation. That's what's going on.
But another thing is, he doesn't admit anything. He says, yeah.
Oh no, he
she's more
admits
righteous
it.
than I am.
He absolutely admits. He recognizes them and said, she's more righteous than I. In other words, he has to, those are mine. Yes. Whoops, folks. I slept with my daughter-in-law. Right? I'm not proud of it. Right? This is not something that I go around wanting other people, saying we should do this. But I promised her something. I didn't fulfill my promise. Would he have killed her? Oh, he could have. But if he had killed her, he would have been a murderer.
So how good and righteous was he when he was ready to kill her? I mean, that's a good righteous thing to do. She's his daughter-in-law, she's pregnant. Oh, wait, let's do it.
But does he do the right thing in the moment that he needs to do the right thing? Isn't that what's important? Is it important to do the right thing in the moment when he could have denied it? He doesn't deny it. He admits.
All of this evidence against him, though. He's got the smoking gun.
Okay, but he still comes forward very quickly. He doesn't hesitate. He's as fast in saying she's more righteous than I as he was in take her out and burn her at the stake. He is just as quick to acknowledge that he was wrong.
But he was only quick to acknowledge because she had protected herself with proof.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Not because he turned righteous.
Go ahead.
But in defense of Judah, I'm just going to say, he really believed that she was this powerful person that was killing his son.
Thank you. Remember, we got to go back to that part of the story.
Okay, that's number one. And so now when she's pregnant and has revealed herself with the staff and credit cards and whatever, then he now knows that his line is going to be carried on, so he's not going to burn her, because now he finally does have the son/grandchild that he wants to have to continue his line, and he may not get it through his son that is still surviving. He doesn't know that he's going to get it, because after all, the other two were kind of not doing the right thing, so he doesn't know if the third one's going to do the right thing.
Excellent.
This is his only chance.
Very
So
good.
he's not going to burn her.
Mhm.
And there's a before and after. I mean, this may have been a complete turnaround for him. And you said that later he's the one that stepped forward to take place of Benjamin.
Good. And that's really important, because the Bible doesn't have a lot of time to explain a transformative process that people go through in order to get to the point. Okay, I see, yes. You know, it's got to get to the point quickly. And by him simply stating, she is more righteous than I, and then later on, very quickly, all of the brothers, he's the one who steps forward. He's the one who says to Dad, don't worry, I will protect Benjamin. He's the one who steps forward in front of Joseph, the most powerful, second most powerful man in Egypt, and says, take me, right? Don't take Benjamin. All of those are examples of this transformation in his character. At least I think that's what the Bible is trying to get us to see about Judah.
What is the cultural or anthropological reason why a woman would have to be married off to a brother to continue the dead brother's seed, especially if these two brothers who died before were wicked? I mean, what would be the...
So it's a good question. I'm not an expert in this, but I think the Levirate marriage is a huge leap forward from what was practiced in the ancient world and is still practiced in some tribes in Africa today, which is that there is a communal wife amongst all the family men all at the same time. Still happens. Still happens to this day. So the Levirate marriage is a huge leap forward in terms of protecting the estate of the brothers, of the sons. And it's not where, I forgot what the term is, where it's not obviously polygamy. There's a word that describes, that's it, thanks, polyandry, where one wife, one woman for all of the men of the household. Thank you. So that's where I think society, wise or anthropologically, this is a huge leap forward. It's not, and eventually the rabbis do away with it. Eventually the Bible does away with it. Levirate doesn't carry forward. But at this period in the development of Israelite religion, it's still a part of, just as you can argue, sacrifices, which was a part of our religious tradition, which is no longer part of our religious tradition today. Yeah.
There's also in some cultures a practice when a husband died that the wife was buried with him, even though she was alive.
That's right. To this day, right? Very good. To this day, there are still cultures where women are widowed for the rest of their life, and they're abused and they're beaten, and there are all sorts of terrible things that happen to them, or they are buried, or they're actually given the choice of being buried, and usually they took that choice because the alternative of staying alive was much worse, because they had no rights whatsoever. So this again is, thank you, a step forward in terms of that cultural milieu. Yes? Yes, there's a bunch of examples of the scarlet red. Wonderful, yes. Let's finish it because we're there. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins boys in her womb. Again, a sign that God is blessing, is rewarding this act. Doubly blessing because of twins. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took the scarlet thread, as you referred to, tied it onto his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out. And she said, so this is how you've broken out. And his name was Peretz. And I think this is an etiology to ultimately a message to us. The whole story is a message to us. Right? The entire story is trying to teach us a lesson about what does it mean to be Judeans? What does it mean to be Jews? How do we as Jews survive in a world where there is injustice, where there are roadblocks, where we are infertile, where we are put to the test time and time again, where people act in manners that are seemingly blocking, holding us back? What can we as Judah do? What can we as Jews do? How do we move forward in the face of what is seemingly terrible injustice in this world? Crimes against us. What can we do? Right? And the story is very clear. Yes, put on a veil, dress up as a prostitute, and go out and do what you got to do. You know, it was a very interesting class. The rabbi told us all. Can you please rewind that on the film?
What I've observed in the lectures, our very patriarchal society wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the acts of the matriarchs.
Indeed.
What can we do is give more women more power, even in today's day and age.
How about equal? Because when God created human beings and created us in God's image, right? Rabbi Irving Greenberg taught this many years ago. He said that, what does that mean? That means we are all of infinite value. We are all equal and we are all unique. That's the essence of what it means to be created in the image of God. Male and female are not the same, but they are equal. The world that was created when God first created the world was of equality. When God says to Adam that I'm going to make for you an ezer kenegdo, right, an equal counterweight to you, that's the intentionality. But life doesn't work that way. And so therefore it is for those who are not equal, those who are being oppressed, that have to use their wile, use their cunning in order to achieve success. In order to get what is rightfully theirs, sometimes we have to behave in manners that are seemingly improper, that look like prostitution, when in reality they're not. Right? And Tamar, like the daughters of Lot, like Ruth, like Leah, like Rachel, like Sarah, and like Rebecca, all did it. And kol hakavod to these women of the Bible. Because without them, as you said, we would not be here. And when you don't have the power, and this was the story of the Jewish people for so long, when you don't have the power, what do you have to do in order to make it right? In order to gain the upper hand? In order to take what is rightfully yours? You have to be smart. You have to use your seichel. And that's exactly what Tamar demonstrates in this case. And when you're caught, right, with your pants down, what must you do? You must stand forward and say, Hineni, here I am. I was wrong. Take responsibility. I admit I was wrong. You are more righteous than I. So that, my friends, is the story of Judah and Tamar. I want to acknowledge Tikva Freimer-Kensky, who was the person who I studied from in her book, The Women of the Bible, where I learned the teachings that I offered to you this evening. And marvelous. Unfortunately, she passed away very young, but she was Tikva Freimer-Kensky, an incredible teacher and reader of the Bible, particularly the women of the Bible. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.